Hey guys, so at this point you should have already done your warm-up and that should have been turned in. You should already go ahead and turn back in your highlighters and then pull the note packet that's titled How to Sketch a Crime Scene. That's going to go hand in hand with this. A lot of this is going to be me doing some explaining, but also me doing a lot of writing and drawing on the screen. So I would suggest that you have a pencil for this. I wouldn't suggest a pen unless you're just really good at sketching and following instructions and you're not going to mess up. So I'm going to give you like a few seconds to get what you need, and then we're going to jump right in and start. Disclaimer: that humming sound you're hearing is the other laptop that's running in the background. I need it up. There's nothing I can do about it. I hope it's not too disturbing or distracting. And at least hopefully when my voice is actually being played, you're hearing that more than you're hearing the humming. But the humming is just the laptop running in the background. Okay, so the purpose of this video is to walk you through kind of step by step all of the things that will go into a rough crime scene sketch, and then how you're going to smooth those things up and create a scale so that you can redraw your final crime scene sketch. Your goal is to get everything down, all of the drawings filled in as they are presented for you on the screen, and then at the end of it, you hopefully will have all the steps you need to be able to do one of these on your own. So I will walk you through a whole example, and then I will pose a question pretty much that you are going to use the details in that question to use to complete a final sketch, and that will be turned in before you leave. So actually you will be completing and turning in both a rough sketch and a final sketch, and you're going to staple the two together. You're going to make sure that your name is on it, and then you're going to turn that into the box. So this part of it is just the note section, and from there on we'll just kind of go through and highlight really slowly and carefully everything that you're going to need. All right, so the whole purpose of a crime scene sketch is for you to be able to detail out information, especially in terms of what the space looked like, what the dimensions were, and where the evidence was found in comparison to main points or fixed points within the location. Remember, the goal of processing your scene is to collect your evidence and to get the evidence off to your technicians and your analysts so that we can start the whole process of figuring out who did what. There isn't a ton of time for sketching, so that's why the rough sketch is always done at the scene of the crime. It's more about, did I get everything that I needed, more than it is about, hey, does this look really good? It's super important that measurements are made quickly, but they're done without disturbing your evidence or without forgetting specific things like walls or doors, or where evidence A was, in comparison to evidence B. And then also you want to make sure that as you're doing all of these things, you're not contaminating the scene. So you don't have a lot of time. You have to move quickly. Whoever your sketch artist is needs to be able to do kind of multiple things all at the same time and still get it done in a neat way that they can later use to interpret a final sketch, or use what they initially collected to make a final sketch. So fast, tidy, accurate. Those are your goals when you're the sketch artist. Okay, so step one in this entire process is always going to be start with the dimensions of your space or the area in which the crime took place. Make sure that you're including entrances and exits in this overall area or overall representation. Stick with simple shapes. Pay attention to what the room looks like. If the room looks like a square, then draw a quick square on your piece of paper. If it looks like a rectangle, draw a rectangle. If it has weird walls that are shorter or off at different angles, just kind of sketch those to the best of your ability on your piece of paper. Now, there are several ways that you can start this base sketch or this rough outline, and the one you have on, actually you don't have anything in this part of your notes. You just have a blank piece of paper, like the very front part of yours is blank. And that's because I will be sketching in several ways that you can start your rough sketch. Which one you use really depends on you and what you prefer. I don't have a preference as long as you're doing one of the three ways that I am about to show you. Okay, so you can draw what I'm about to draw on your piece of paper. Try to give yourself enough space to do 3 separate drawings and write a little bit of notes off to the side for each drawing. Now you know I don't draw well, so just go with it. It'll be okay. So on our first sketch, one of the approaches we can do is think of your room as a box without a lid. So you have the floor of the box and then you have the 4 sides of the box. And imagine what would happen if you were to cut where those 4 sides or 4 walls joined to each other. When you laid your box out, you would have your square or your rectangle in the middle, and then these 4 pieces or 4 flaps that fold over or fold flat. So that's the approach some people like, and that type of sketch looks something like this. So you're going to have, this is your main floor. So think of it as the floor plan of the box. And then where the wall was on this side, we would draw it in like this. And then this would be the other wall. This would be another wall here. And then a final wall here. And if you had windows, you could represent those windows here and here. And here. And here. Let's say you had a door. Then you would represent that door. You just kind of make it a bigger shape. And then don't forget at some point you will have a key, so you could be able to differentiate between the window and the key. So this is kind of a flat sketch. It's, again, if I were to picture my room as a box and cut it down and spread it out, this is what that sketch would look like. This is not my preferred method of sketching. It's not the one that I would default to, but some people really like this approach. So this is sketch example number 1, if you will. Okay, the second approach to a sketch is going to look like this. So again, I'm still going to have just my floor plan. This time I'm not super concerned about the walls, but I still will show where a doorway would go or where a window would go if that was part of the room. So it could look something like this. Okay, so let's talk about what some of these different features are. These little triangular, like they look like almost like triangles, or push outs, like right here and here and here, those would be your windows. Now this part right here, that would be your door. Okay, so this one takes all the guesswork out with like the walls and all of that. You can still show where your windows would go, and it's just a little bit more streamlined. I prefer this one over method 1, but I still personally prefer method 2, or kind of a combo between method 2 and method 3. Right, so for method 3, very similar to method 2, just a different way of representing the windows and maybe sometimes even the doors. So we would have our we would have our 4 walls here, 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 and here. Our door might be represented like this, maybe not as long on the bottom. Okay, so that's our doorway. And then our windows would be drawn in like that. Okay, so windows, this would be our door. So this is more of my go-to if I'm sketching, but again, you can do whichever of these would work. I will say that realize that if you're going to choose method 1, there are more steps. There's more spacing that you have to be aware of. There are more things to take into consideration. It might be an easier process, at least initially, until you get comfortable to do method 2 or method 3 for your floor plan representations. But at the end of the day, that part is up to you. So at this point, you should have all of part 1 filled out with the little bit of notes at the top, and then these 3 drawings kind of in the middle and at the bottom. So everything we just got done with was step 1. That's just literally drawing out your outline and your space that you're going to be working with. So step 2 is, at this point, someone in your team, or maybe even you yourself, you've measured the room and the space in which the crime has occurred. So you know the exact dimensions of the room, and you know the units that those dimensions are in, so you should go ahead and add those to your sketch. You always want to make sure that if your room has multiple walls that are not the same length repeated, then each wall needs a label. But in the case of our diagram is in the form of a rectangle. So more than likely this wall and this bottom wall will equal to the same size. So you just have to record the dimension on one wall. Just like this space and this space should be equal in length. So you just have to record the dimension against one wall. Now, in this image, the dimensions are recorded in feet. For the purpose of our notes, it's fine to record them in feet, but don't forget that when we do true measurements, that's going to be using the metric system. So on your diagram under number 2, just go ahead and include these measurements because that's going to be a permanent part of your rough sketch. You're going to need to be able to transfer that information to a final sketch, so you must have it down on your rough. Once you have your dimensions done, then step 3 comprises of, let's figure out where the major players in the room would go, the major defining features in the room. So any furniture that's bolted to the floor and isn't going to move, or any furniture that takes up a fair amount of space and will be important to visualizing the room once you've left it, that's what you're going to want to record. You're also going to want to record any evidence that you have found at this point in time. Notice that we are using basic shapes. We're not trying to draw an entire couch or a stove or a refrigerator or whatever. We're using rectangles and circles and squares for the most part, because you do get to label all of these parts and pieces later on. So on your number 3 on notes, I would like you to just quickly diagram what you're seeing on the image in front of you for step 3. So go ahead and put in the squares and the rectangles, and put in the circles, put in the body, and then this right here should either be blood or footprints or something along that nature. So just put those in exactly as you see them on the screen. Now I'm going to give you a minute or 2 to get those down. They don't have to be precise, they just have to be functional. All right, so at this point you should probably have most of that drawn, and I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. If you're not done, just say something, let the sub know, and they can pause it for you. Step 4 is to take that drawing that has your furniture and your evidence and label what those parts and pieces are using either a number system or a letter system. It really doesn't matter which one you do, as long as you've written out a key and you let other people know what those letters or numbers mean. So again, I'm going to give you some time to redraw this. I understand that you've just drawn it, but redraw it again because practice makes perfect. And then you can go ahead and write out the key. And you can use the key that's given to you right here, or you can fill that up based on how you feel. Just as long as you understand that these structures and letters represent different elements within your scene. Actually, at this point, whoever is controlling the video, just go ahead and pause so that everyone can get that down. And then when the class lets you know that they're ready, go ahead and start it up again. Okay, this is the point. So we're on step 5. This is the point at which you would want to start writing in some of the finer details, the things that are not sketched in. So you're going to want to put the date, the time, the location, the victim's name. You also want to add the name of your investigative team or your CSI team. If the victim's name is unknown, but you know the gender, this is where you would just utilize either John Doe or Jane Doe. While you're at the scene of the crime, someone should have done your directions, so you should at least know where north is. Now, you don't necessarily have to fill in the 3 other points, but as long as you show where north is on your diagram, that's good enough. Step 6 is going to include our fixed point measurements. So remember, quick recap, that a fixed point is an object or a point that is stationary. It's not movable in your room. It's bolted down, or it's a wall or something along those lines. And we always do 2 measurements from your fixed point. The only pattern that we don't use, the two measurement system, would be your polar coordinate, where you use one actual measurement and then a direction of some sort. So it just depends on which one you're using. Now, if writing in the numbers and detailing out where those points are going to be measured is going to clutter the diagram or clutter your sketch, then everything doesn't need to be noted on the actual sketch. You can add that information into like your notes section, for example. But if it's a big enough space or there's not too many things in the sketch, then you can go ahead and add those measurements in. So it could be added in a separate document, or it could be added to the actual sketch, just depending on whether or not it's going to clutter it. Okay, so at this point, we're going to take a break from writing, and we're going to look at some examples of sketches, just so you can get an idea of what different ones can look like. All right, so on this one, we're going to start with the details. So notice up on the top, they give you some information here. Whoops, sorry. Up on the top, they give you some information here. This is going to detail out the type of crime that they think it is. This right here tells you the date. Notice it's a full date, so day, month, and year. It tells you who your sketch artist is and the time at which it was prepared. So this particular method does a couple of different techniques all in one. She does have her floor plan, but then she also has some areas that protrude off of the main floor plan, but at some point will play a pivotal role, or important at least, to the sketch. There is a lot going on here. This is not one big room. It's multiple things within a section. There are a lot of good details. Note that it's not tons and tons of very closely resembled drawing. She didn't particularly try to draw like a kitchen or a bathroom or whatever. She just drew enough that you could understand what you were looking at. Notice that some things are labeled in the room itself because it just helps and it's easier for you to be able to see it that way. So in terms of the details of the sketch, like right here, this is where the bulk of the crime took place in these two locations. Notice she used a number system to tell you what you're seeing. And then look at some of her notes, like number 6, which is this point right here. So it says that that victim suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the abdomen. Now you can't see that on your sketch, but you don't have to be able to see it on the sketch. The details are given in the key. So that's why the key becomes so very important to being able to interpret what these images show. Let me scoot this down a little bit. Whoops. Well, that didn't really work. Anyway, so from what I can see here, there are a couple things that are missing though. I don't see anything showcasing where North is. I don't see a victim's name or even John or Jane Doe, and actually there are 2 victims here. But other than that, this is a pretty good rough sketch. So not super fancy, just really functional. Now, while this sketch looks very, very professionally done, very clean lines, realize that this is probably done by a computer and not by a freehand. How do we know it's not a final sketch? Because of these words right here. Because of these words right here. Not drawn to scale. Your rough sketch is always going to be free-handed. It's not drawn to a particular scale. But your final sketch must be drawn to a particular scale. And we'll talk about what scaling is in a little bit. So just to go through again, we know what kind of crime, we know the date. Right here it seems like we have our case number, we have a location, we know who drew the sketch, and again we have a key. And because it's done with a computer system, some of these images are going to be a little bit more defined. But if you look at it, for the most part, it's still just circles and squares and rectangles and ovals and that kind of thing. They demark their evidence in 3 different ways. So if the evidence has a number and that number is enclosed by a circle, that is evidence that was found on the floor, horizontally on the floor. If the evidence has a triangle around its number, then it was still horizontal evidence, but it was elevated. So it was found on a higher surface. So think of the floor of the room versus like a countertop, for example. And then if the number has a square around it, that evidence was vertical evidence. So they just kind of gave a little bit more details in terms of where in the location these bits of evidence were found. And you can start picturing certain things in your head. This one does have our compass that denotes where North is. So really good diagram. Again, this one's done by a computer. Still not a finished diagram or a final sketch because it's not drawn to scale. So this is a little bit more along the lines of what you are going to be expected to do when you freehand your drawing. So no computer program. This looks like someone did it quickly and it was just about getting certain bits of information. Now the one thing that none of these really had, none of them showed the dimensions of the room, so the length or width of the room, and that would be something that I expect you to put on your sketch. A sketch like this, there's not a lot going on, so I would also expect you to put the fixed point measurement dimensions in your sketch. So for example, if let's say you did the grid pattern, I would put, let me change pens real quick. And let's say we're going to, so they said that they found hairs in spot 2. So I would do from this, from this wall to 2, that would be one set of measurements. And then from there to the part of the window that doesn't move, like hopefully it's a window that slides or something, or maybe it's a window that doesn't move at all, it just depends. So I would expect some numbers here. Like this might be 2 meters. This might be 0.7 meters. I'm just making up random numbers at this point. But there's enough space in this diagram where you could show that and it wouldn't get in the way. So in terms of what the diagram does include, so again, we know location. We know date. We have a case number. We do know location, and we know the name of the victim. And then here would be our key. This would be our key or legend, just in this little section here to detail what some of these things are. If it were me, would still like you to tell me, like for example, what's this? What's this? What's that? Okay, I know this is a doorway, I know this is a window, but what are these other things? And is this bed connected, or is it two separate beds? Like what's that weird space in the middle? These would all be things that I expect your diagram to clarify. So in terms of the final sketch, here are a couple of things to keep in mind. You don't get a second opportunity to sketch a scene. You see it one time, you sketch it that one time, and you get as much detail as you can because your final sketching takes place away from the crime scene. So if you didn't get that information while you were there, then that's something that your final sketch is going to be missing. You're going to do that final sketch after you leave the crime scene, not while you're there. It has to be done away. And it's because it needs to be done to scale, so some time and effort needs to go in to making sure that the scale is appropriate and that the final sketch looks as neat as possible. Just the same way the rough sketch should look rough, it should look free-handed, the final sketch should look really neat and tidy, done with a ruler, done to scale. It can be done on regular paper or it can be done on graph paper. I personally only like using the graph paper if it's the faint lined graph paper, so like the one with the blue lines, because that way if I make copies of it, I'm not going to get a bunch of boxes that interrupt my field of view. If you do it on graph paper, you do have to contend with all of those little squares, but sometimes having the squares there helps with your accuracy. So it just depends. In class, we will do kind of both. I'll let you try one with graph paper, and I'll let you try one without, and we'll just go from there. So I did leave you some space at the bottom of your, I guess that would be your second page or your fourth, I don't know, depending on how you count. Second paper, fourth page, whichever. But you probably used most of that to write up the information on your final sketch. So that's why there is that extra piece of just plain white paper attached to your notes. So that's for the section that we're about to do, which will go over how to draw something to scale. So unlike doing an architectural representation, for crime scene sketches, you're not using the entire piece of paper for just your drawing. There is some writing that takes place, and depending on how big your crime scene is or how much evidence is left on your crime scene, you might have a lot of writing to do. So you need to factor in how much paper you're going to need to write details like dates and names and your key and all of those things. And you cannot include that in the amount of space that you have for drawing purposes. So estimate about how much space, or better yet, my approach would be to write those details out first, because this is your final sketch. So you're already back at your office, quote unquote. So write out all those details first, figure out how much space that leaves you, and that tells you the area in which you have to draw your final sketch, which is going to help you to determine the scale that you're drawing your sketch to. So final sketches are not drawn on a one-to-one scale. One-to-one would be like, hey, here's my computer and here's a piece of paper big enough. I want you to draw an exact representation of my computer to size. So if I picked up your to size drawing, I should be able to put it over your computer and have the exact same dimensions of your computer. We can't do that in real life with things as big as a room or as big as a person. We just don't have enough paper for that. So everything is done to scale, meaning you're making things smaller than they actually are. So the easiest way to go about it is to know the length of your room, the longest dimension of the room, and then divide it by the longest dimension of the section of the paper that you still have available for drawing. So for example, let's say that the length of the room that you are working in or that you're drawing is 11 meters. And the length of your paper is 10 inches after you've factored in spaces to write. So problem number one is that my room is in meters and my paper is in inches, and you kind of want them in the same unit or at least in the same system so that it's easier. So remember when we did metric conversions, this is one of those places that metric conversions comes back. So being able to convert between the imperial system, so feet and inches and all of that, and the metric system becomes really helpful. So I've given you a little example, so feel free to write these notes down in that space as we go. So if you remember that 1 inch is the equivalent of 2.54 centimeters, then if I have 10 inches of paper, that's the same as me having 25.4 centimeters of paper. So at least now I'm in the same system. I'm using meters and I'm using centimeters. So now I need to figure out, well, what does 1 centimeter on paper represent in real life? That's what your scale is. Your scale is like saying, if I move 1 centimeter on this page or on this piece of paper, it's the same as if I had moved 2 feet or 2 meters in real life. Okay, so if I take my 11 meters, and I divide it by my 25.4 centimeters, I am going to get 0.43, and that's in meters. So literally what that means is 1 centimeter on my piece of paper is the same as 0.43 meters in real life. Or another way to think about it, if you want to keep all the units the same, is that 1 centimeter on my paper is the same as 43 centimeters in real life. Okay, so that's one way of thinking about it. So now you have to figure out if you have enough paper to draw what that would look like. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. Okay, so some things to remember. We figured out that the scale we're using is 1 centimeter equals 43 centimeters in real life. So think of this as 1 centimeter on paper and then 43 centimeters in real life. Okay, that's the scale that we came up with. Okay, so we started off with 11 meters as our room. If we were to convert that, that 11 meters would become 1,100 centimeters. Okay, if we're trying to keep it all in the same system. If I take that 1,100 centimeters and I divide it by 43, because in real life, every centimeter represents 43, it means that I need to have 25 point, let's say 6, because if we round that, it's really 25.58, but we're going to say 25.6. I need to have 25.6 centimeters on my piece of paper if I were to draw this to scale using the system that I came up with. Well, when you think that a piece of paper is 8.5 by 11 inches on the long end, so this would be your 11 and this would be your 8.5. That's the size of a piece of paper. Okay, now on my long end, I am going to need 25 centimeters. So you're going to need to be able to figure out if this 11 inches is enough for 25.6 centimeters. So if I took my, if I took my 11 inches and I times it by 2.54, remember I'm doing that because there are 2.54 centimeters in every inch, then that would give me 27.94 centimeters to work with on this part of my paper. But again, I have information to write in, so it depends on how small you write your info. You may need all 11 inches for drawing, or you might have some of that you're using for writing. So it just depends. But if we were to just use the piece of paper as is, technically I would have enough centimeters on that side to cover the amount of centimeters that I figured out that my length needs to be. So what does that mean for your drawing? It literally means, I'm going to switch slides, so hold on a second. Okay, so what that means is I'm going to draw 1 centimeter as precisely as I can on here using my ruler. Okay, well, that's a little bit more than 1 centimeter, but you get the point. So this 1 centimeter is the same as 43 centimeters in real life. This little space right here represents 43 real size, people size, if you will, centimeters. So if I needed to recreate 1100 centimeters, it means that I would have to draw 25.5 centimeters based off of a ruler. So let's see if I have enough space to do that. Not completely, but I will try. Okay, let's put it this way. From where my pen is right now, whoops, well, you know, y'all knew I couldn't draw, so no expectations. Okay, this blue line that I just drew, that represents 24 real life centimeters. But on my scale drawing, that 24 real life centimeters is the same as 1032 centimeters. Okay, so remember, that's 24 centimeters on paper, but in real life, that's 1032 centimeters. Okay, so hopefully that kind of makes sense. This is something that we're going to practice. We'll practice the scaling. Even though I'm pretty sure you've seen scaling before, at least in like geometry maybe, but for sure you've seen it in math. It's just about remembering how to do it and then to apply it to this kind of new thing. Okay, so at this point we're going to go through and do a rough drawing just based on some information that I'm going to give you. I'm going to do this rough drawing with you. And then at the end of this video, I will narrate another rough drawing that you're going to do on your own. And you guys can play it over as many times as you need to. All right, so let's practice doing a rough sketch. And I'm just going to narrate the sketch. And as I talk, I am going to draw what I'm talking about. And I want you to do the same in the space that you have left. Okay, so this is going to be, we're going to make it fairly simple so that we can do it fairly easily. It's going to be an indoor scene, and the space or the dimensions is going to be rectangular in nature. So we're going to have 2 long walls. Oops. So here is the first, and here is the second. And let's go ahead and include a doorway because you need a door to be able to get into the room. So there we go. Something along those lines. It's not pretty, but you know my motto. It doesn't have to be pretty, it has to be functional. Then we're going to have 2 short walls. That's a real crooked short wall, but you get the point. Here and there. Then let's go ahead and show where north is. So on this sketch, north is going to be in this direction. So on that north-facing wall, we're going to have 2 windows. And we're going to put them here and here. And now let's get some dimensions going. So my longest wall, and there are 2 of them, they're going to be the same size. They're going to be 23 meters long. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw in arrows to show exactly what that 23 includes. And then that shorter wall, let's make that one 16 meters. And again, I'm going to draw in some arrows to show exactly where that 16 goes to. So literally by doing this, I'm saying that my wall of 23 runs from here to here, and my wall of 16 runs from here to here. All right, so let's talk about these windows. These windows, and oh, sorry, this is, whoops. Not messing it up. This is meters, and this is also meters. So these windows, let's make the windows 1 meter in terms of length, and let's say that they are 4 meters away from each other. Okay, so let's talk about inside of this room. Right in front of these windows on this north facing wall, we're going to have a long couch. So that couch is going to go from here to here, and let's label it 1. And what I like to do as I do this, I go ahead and make the key right away so that I know exactly what it is I'm talking about. So for me, 1 is my couch. Okay, then I want a chair in this room. Let's make it a diagonal chair between that north wall and that east wall. So I'm just going to use a square right here to represent my chair. And let's make that 2. So 2 is the chair. Okay, then let's say in the scuffle that we overturned a chair or a stool or an end table, if you will. So let's make that right here. We're going to call this 3. And we want to label that it's an overturned end table. Okay. Now I'm going to need to get some dimensions because this overturned end table probably happened in the scuffle, because most people don't just leave their furniture lying around like that, then it might be important. So let's go ahead and do some measurements. So I'm going to measure from this wall here to my end table, and then down here to my end table. And let's make this 1 meter, and let's make this 2 meters away. So there's my first fixed point measurement. Now let's say I have a body just in front of this chair. So let's put my body here. And you guys know I'm not a good artist, so it's going to be a stick figure body. And I'm going to need to know where my body was in reference to everything else, but I can't use these chairs and these couches because they move. So I'm going to measure from my person's head to this wall on the east side, and then I'm going to measure from my person's head to this wall on the north side. And we're going to say that this is 2.5 meters away, and let's make this 3 meters away. Okay, and we're going to call my body object number 4. And let's give him some stab wounds, and that's something I might want to note on my sketch. So 4 is going to be body with 3 ab for abdominal stab wounds. Okay, now let's say that this perpetrator, whoever he is, dropped a gun, and that gun landed right about there. So let's make that 5. So evidence piece number 5 is going to be a gun. And I'm still going to need some measurements. Now notice this end of my room is pretty packed. So I probably shouldn't put any more measurements here. So I'm going to use this west wall because we haven't used it yet. So I'm going to measure from my gun to that west wall, and then from my gun to the south wall. And this, let's say that's about 3 meters. And then let's make this one, let's say 9.7 meters. And guys, I'm just making these numbers up, of course. Okay, and then as our perp was leaving the room, he dropped a bloody glove or something. Let's say a glove. So let's make this evidence piece number 6. Okay, and again, I'm going to need some measurements. So I'm going to measure from the glove to the wall. Let's make that 0.5 meters. And then from the glove to the west wall, and let's make that 7 meters. And I think that's everything that we would need based on the evidence we found. But there's still some details that we are going to have to put in. So in terms of location, let's say that this happened on 344 Main Street. And the date is going to be 11/15/2009. And the incident is a homicide. And the sketch was done by yours truly. Feel free to put your own name since you're the ones doing the sketch. And we don't know the person's name, so it's going to be John Doe. Let's make the time of this 12:29 a.m., which actually happens to be the time that I am making this video. Let's make, what else do we need? We have our measurements, we have our fixed points, we know north. Let's give it a case number. So our case number is, whoops, oh shoot, what did I do? Oh shoot. Hopefully I didn't do too much damage with whatever button I just pushed. But let's make our case, whoops. Let's make our case number 16749. And that's kind of enough to go on. Now, notice, not pretty. Not pretty at all. Super functional. You could take this and turn this into a rough sketch, into a final sketch, sorry, if you needed to. Okay, so at this point, here's what I'm going to do. Excuse me. I am going to go to a clean slide, and I'm going to talk you through another sketch like this, but I'm also going to write some of the fine details down. And that's the one that you'll be practicing on your sheet of paper entitled, excuse me, My Rough Sketch, because, you know, I'm super inventive with the names. So get what you need. Please do it in pencil. If you can't find a pencil, go ahead and ask the sub or one of your classmates, and they will happily lend you a pencil, I'm sure. So I'm giving you like half a minute to get yourself together, and then I'm coming back. And we're back. So, my rough sketch. Whoops. Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay, so this room is going to be a rectangle. And you're going to make your long wall 22.7 meters. And let's make your short wall 16 meters. This room has one door and one window. let's go ahead and make north point to the top of the piece of paper. So north is going to be this way. And your window is going to be on your north wall. Oops, can't spell. That should be window, not windon. So your window is going to be on the north wall. And close to the left of the building. Okay, so it's on the north wall, but it's on the left side of the north wall. And let's put your door on the south wall. And it's going to be on the right. Okay, so door on the right of the south wall, and the window is on the left of the north wall. So kind of they're on opposite sides of the room from each other. Not directly opposite, kind of like diagonal opposite. Let's also put a long bookcase against the west wall in this room. Okay, so long bookcase against the west wall. Now let's add some details. Let's make this like a home office. So there's going to be a desk that has things on it, and there's going to be a table with a lamp and a chair. And those are going to be on the left side of the room. And actually, let's go ahead and put a suicide note on that desk as well. Okay, and then we're going to have a lamp next to the desk. And let's put that lamp on the right-hand side. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and switch slides real quick. And let's put 2 chairs in front of the desk. Okay, now let's have our body in the middle of the room. And let's say that the body was let's make it 10 meters from the east wall and 5 meters from the north wall. Okay, now let's have a gun. Let's put the gun in the corner of the room. We're going to put it in the upper right-hand corner of the room. So it's going to be 2 meters from the east wall. And let's say 3.6 meters from the north wall. And let's have, I'm going to switch slides again. Let's have some bloody footprints. Oops. Around the body. And yeah, that's it. So those are your details. And all the other information that you need to fill in, you can leave that up to your own imagination. So the case number, the date, the address, all of that, you just make that information up. Now, don't stress out too much about this. This is more about practicing the things that you can do really well. Now, there's some things that's going to be hard to do just because you're not doing this from sight. You're doing this from what I've written and what you've heard. Do the best you can. Okay, so that's it. When you are done, again, you are going to don't turn in your notes, but you will turn in your rough sketch. I think initially in the video I said that you would also do a final sketch. That's going to be based on how much time you have left. But I need everyone to turn in a rough sketch before they leave today. Turn into the box. All right, I will see you guys next week. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye, y'all.